And I laid on the couch. There was a couch in our bedroom at the foot of our bed. And I didn't have anything to say. He didn't say anything to me because he already knew, well, this is a situation here. And so I'm going to be the one that's going to be mad. And I finally just kind of whispered to him. He was ironing his clothes. And I said, why would you do that to me? And he has the iron in his hand and he's ironing on the iron board and he just takes it, bang, 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 and slams it several times and starts yelling at me about me and my actions and how I respond to him when I'm questioning him about something he's done wrong to me in essence. And it was in that moment that I was like, this isn't going to work. Have you ever looked at a photo of yourself smiling and was immediately reminded of that moment in time? The pain, the past, the pressure you endured? It's been said a photo holds 1,000 words, but can we fearlessly tell the truth and courageously open our heart vault of vulnerability to share those words? I'm your host, Takiya LaShawn. All right, so topic of discussion today. I want to jump right in because this is a topic that has been swirling in my head for maybe the past week now. And the title of it actually, I'm going to call it The Marriage That Made No Sense. And I'll tell you how this came about. As I've been recording my podcast and sharing with other podcasters, I've been getting a tremendous amount of invites to sit as a guest and share my stories and my testimonies on other platforms. And it's been amazing. And I had a podcast interview this past weekend, and that was an eye-opening episode because as I am doing these episodes, I'm feeling more and more comfortable and more confident about sharing what goes on behind this smile and just the different aspects and impacts of my life. And this past episode, this podcast that I sat on, was leaned more towards a lot of questions that opened up a discussion about my marriage. And so I am going to talk about that as best I can with as much detail as I can because I've been sharing the story of my ex-husband being a stalker, my stalker. We're now divorced, and I've shared this on previous podcast episodes about my experience with intimate partner stalking. And I've talked about the stalking and I've shared pieces of how that happened, which entailed my marriage. And I haven't really divulged or discussed the marriage in depth. And to be totally honest, there are a lot of people that are close to me or friends and family that don't even know all the details of what occurred and what I endured in the marriage and what took place. And so I am ready for that. Like I said, I knew I would get to the place of talking about it, but I woke up this morning. I came straight to my podcast studio, which is also my prayer closet. And I am going to walk through this and talk through this as the Lord leads me and allows me to. So I want to leave no stone unturned. This may be a 2-part series, or it may just be a very lengthy episode. So let's jump right in. So I was married in 2021, October of 2021. And it's interesting because I think for most of us that have encountered or overcome or endured some form of trauma, the brain has a way of blocking out or tucking away those experiences, or we in and of ourselves can do that. And for me, talking about my marriage, of course, while I was married and in it, I know important dates and timelines and memories and occurrences. But after the divorce and enduring the stalking, there are things that I deemed no longer important to me. And one of those things was dates. Like I just told myself, those are dates I want to remember, don't want to remember. Those are dates that are behind me. Those are dates that are no longer important. So, I had to think there for a second as to when I actually got married. So it was October was when we met, actually. So I'm going to back up. 2020. I first met who is now my ex-husband in March. Wow. This is March. 4 years later. Wow. I first met, I have to look at the calendar. It's probably to the day, which is probably why I woke up with this heavy in my spirit to talk about. But anyway, I met him in March of 2020. My son was in his junior year of high school, transitioning to his senior year of high school. And we lived in a community. And in this community, we had horses. The horses they were mine to care for. The owner of the home owned a beautiful property with 3 horses, and he owned several properties. And we had come across this property through prayer, faith, the grace of God. It was a complete blessing. But we found ourselves living at this property, and the property had horses, which was actually a direct prayer of mine was, God, if I'm going to live in this space, in this place, then give me horses. So my ex-husband at the time worked for this company that did service people deliveries and provided the feed and the hay and any kind of material or things that people with horses would need. And so I first interacted with him as a representative of that company. I would call and place an order for things that I needed delivered and put out in the barn or the tack room, feed room. And he was the individual that was sent out for these deliveries. Now, I want to share this because every aspect of it is very important, because while I talk about this, I'm going to be very candid, very honest, very open, but I want to share every aspect of how God moved in this also. Even with it turning out the way that it did, I feel like it's very important for me to share that part of my story, because I know there will be a lot of questions and it'll just make a lot of people's brain go tilt. Trust me, it's done it with myself. That's why this is titled The Marriage That Made No Sense, but God. So he was the one that did the deliveries. I would call the feed store, place an order, and then when he came out, we would interact through text because it was a private gated community. And so, him working for the company, he only had access to the community through the company, through my given permission to come into the gate. So we had to communicate via text. And so this day in particular, when I met who is now my ex-husband, he was coming out to do a delivery. And my son would always go out and meet with him to help unload the truck or tell him where items needed to go in the feed room and in the stalls for the horses. This day in particular, I was standing in my kitchen and I was washing dishes. And I always knew when the deliveries were coming because I get a text notification, but I could hear the gate on the side of the house being open for the truck to be backed in. And so at this time, I was standing in the kitchen washing dishes, and I sent my son out to say, "Hey, the delivery guy's here, go help." And he went out to do that as he normally would. And this day in particular, God told me, "Go introduce yourself." And I remember standing in the kitchen window and thinking, why? Why? Why do I need to go introduce myself? But I quickly shrugged it off as, well, you've never met this individual face to face. You have never introduced yourself. This is your property that you're living on. He's used to coming out here making these deliveries. Maybe he's only familiar with the owner. So go introduce yourself and let him know you're the person that is in charge and who's on the property and who he's been interacting with. Maybe it was just a common courtesy thing, is what I wrote it off to be. So I obeyed. I did what God asked me to, which was go introduce yourself. So I walked outside, put on my yard boots, trekked over to where he and my son were hauling things off the truck and putting them in the tack room, the feed room. And I extended my hand out for a handshake and I said, "Hi." And I called his name and I said, "I'm Takiya." And he stopped what he was doing and just gave me this blank stare. No response, didn't extend his hand back to meet mine to shake it. No words, just a cold freeze, mouth dropped open and staring at me. It was a very awkward moment. And he finally snaps out of it and he says, "How did you know my name?" And I said, "Oh, well, we've been texting. I'm the one who's been placing the orders and communicating with you about that." And so he shakes it off and says, "Oh, okay." And then he goes back into the blank stare. Still didn't acknowledge the handshake or anything. And it just crickets, awkwardly silent. And so I basically said, "Okay, great." And spun on my heels and walked off in awkward silence. And I remember on the way back to the house telling God, "That was really weird. Please don't ever make me do that again." It was uncomfortable. And I just kind of chuckled about it and went back in the house, went on about my business. They continued to do what they needed to do until he finished unpacking the truck and he left. Later that evening, it was later that evening, I get a text from him and he says, "Oh, I forgot a part of your delivery. You ordered gloves and I forgot to deliver those." And so I said, "Hey, it's no big deal. You can bring them on the next delivery on the next time you come out." And he was adamant that, "No, I can bring them back tonight. If you'll just give me access to get into the gate again, it's not a problem." And that made me a little uncomfortable, which hindsight is 2020 as we move forward in me talking about this. It's like you go through things and you look back and you go, "Oh, there were signs and symptoms of what this person's character could possibly be like that you don't see while you're in it." So I said it made me feel uncomfortable because this was after hours and he was asking me for my permission, asking me to give him access to enter into the private community. And with the company had access. That was fine. But reaching out to me to ask me off the clock on your personal time to give you access code to my community to bring back a pair of gloves at 8, 9 o'clock at night made me extremely uncomfortable. And I said no. And he asked a couple more times because he said, I'm just so sorry. I feel bad that no. It's not a big deal. Bring it on the next order. We have gloves here now. Bring it on the next order. So that was that. And then maybe another day or two transpired and I get a random text from him. And the text says, yes, I am single, but how did you get this number? How did you get my number? And when I got the text, I just rolled my eyes because I knew what he was trying to do. He was trying to spark a conversation. He was trying to get me to engage in conversation with him because he was clearly interested in me from the introduction. And he's wanting in some way, shape, or form for me to acknowledge that, oh, this man is single and, whoever he's pretending to talk to, he's attempting to look validated in that or pursued by whoever this person he claims to be texting him. But I knew it was just a way to engage in conversation with me. And I didn't fall into it. I was quite annoyed. And I responded back and I said, look, you know who this is. This is Takiya. You text Takiya, and I did not text you about you being single. I have no interest. So stop. And he responded back and says, oh, I'm sorry. I meant to text that to someone else. And yeah, okay. Well, just understand you didn't reach someone else. You reached me and I'm not interested. So stop. So that was the end of that. That was March 2020. And went on about my business, my life, because at this point in time in my life, I had zero interest in engaging in dating or being pursued. My son had just come out of a head-on car collision and was in the midst of having surgeries and physical therapy and mental health counseling for the post-traumatic stress disorder. He was having nightmares and night sweats and all kind of stuff. And I truthfully had also not just recently got out of a relationship, but maybe, let's see, this 2020, so 2018, 2 years prior, had been in a very serious relationship and it didn't work out. And I had walked through that and done my healing and was just at a place where I was really happy with where I was, the direction that life was taking. And I just wasn't in the headspace to want to date anyone or let alone be pursued. So I didn't even consider entertaining him. And to be honest, looks or character or anything like that had not even entered my mind because, again, my thought process was I'm not in that vein. I'm not interested or looking or what have you. And it's interesting now talking about it because you've always heard it said, or people always say, you will find love or it'll happen when you least expect it or when you're not looking for it. And I wasn't. So the text messages ended. He continued to do his job and come out with doing the deliveries. I think I did deliveries like every 2 to 3 weeks or what have you. But I never interacted with him again. He would come on the property, make his deliveries and leave. He respected the boundary that I had set. So 7 months go by. You fast forward 7 months, no interaction, no further communication, him just doing his job, me going about my life, handling my business. 7 months later, I get an invitation I was asked to be the keynote speaker at a business retreat located in, I believe it was Chattanooga, Tennessee. Now, at the time, I lived in South Carolina. So the business retreat was in Tennessee. And I was asked if I would take the honor of being the keynote speaker. What's important about this invitation is the fact that the woman that invited me, it turns out that she was a good friend of mine. We'd known each other at this point for about 8 years solid. And we were already friends. And she's an entrepreneur, and she says, "Hey, Takiya, hosting this business retreat. It's majorly family, and there are several mini entrepreneurs in my family. And so we decided to gather and do a business retreat annually. And we would love to have you as the keynote speaker." So my exact words were, I was in the midst of handling a business transaction myself, transition. And I said, let me pray on it, because I got a lot going on and I'm not sure if the dates will line up, and I don't want to put too much on my plate. I would be honored to do it, but let me pray about it. Let me ask God. And instantly in that moment, I'm still on the phone with her and I hear God say, go. So I tell her, I said, you know what? I got to go. I don't need to go pray about it. God told me go as we're having this conversation. So put me in the game, coach. I'm there. And so I put that on my calendar. And that retreat was in October. Like I said, 7 months later. And wait a minute, let me see, March, June, July, August. Yeah, October. So they booked a flight for me, got me all squared away, and I flew out in October of 2020 to this business retreat. Here's another significant factor. I'm going to point out the aha moments in this. Pick me up by car from the airport, drive me to the retreat, the housing facility where the retreat is being hosted at. And I get out the car and I'm the first one to the door. As I get to the door, a gentleman opens the door for me. And I say gentleman. He opens the door. He's in a suit. He's clean cut, clean shaven. He looks like an entrepreneur, a businessman. We're at a business retreat. And he opens the door to allow me in. Now, when he opens the door, I introduce myself. And I don't know his name or who he is, but I'm just being polite, being cordial. And I say, "Hi, I'm Takiya. How are you?" And as I'm walking past him, I get this deer caught in the headlights stare. Sound familiar? Back up 7 months ago, God tells me, go introduce yourself. And I get a deer caught in the headlights stare. 7 months later, I'm at a retreat. And this man is opening the door to welcome me in. And as I introduce myself, I get a deer caught in the headlights stare. At the same time, something inside is like, man, this guy seems familiar. He feels familiar. And not in a way of he looks familiar or he sounds familiar or maybe I know you from somewhere. But I don't know how to describe it other than internally, spiritually, he felt familiar. There was a knowing, and I felt that. And I also noted as I was walking by, he didn't even bother to return my introduction with anything. He just stared at me as I walked by. And so I didn't think anything of it. And I went on to my room to get unpacked and introduce myself to everyone else at the retreat. We engage in the retreat. each and every one of us there. We had like a roundtable discussion. There were some workshops, some breakout things. Other people spoke. And when it came to the next day where it was my turn to speak, I got up in front of the room to speak, and I'm introducing myself and sharing my background in entrepreneurship, but I'm also sharing my history because um, my history of entrepreneurship is based on my foundation of my testimonies, what I've gone through and what God has brought me through, and how He's turned pain into purpose in every aspect of entrepreneurship or my nonprofit or my retreats or my books or even the home that I was living in back in South Carolina with the horses. Everything was a testament to what God had done as a part of my story, very integral part of my story. So I'm sharing all of this as I'm speaking. And as I'm speaking, I make eye contact at different times with this man that opened the door for me. And every time I make eye contact with him, he is just so engaged and engrossed in what I'm saying. I remember thinking like, man, he is really hanging on to every word I'm saying. Like he's really drawn and he's really listening. The whole room was listening. The whole room was captivated, so to speak, but he was just leaning in. And I remember at some point almost feeling not a negative discomfort, but a, a discomfort as, okay, he's listening and I have his attention, but there's definitely some sort of interest here because I felt like I was being just consumed by his eyes. And I continue speaking. And when I finish speaking, I go into the kitchen portion of the home and grab a snack, grab a drink, grab something to eat. And he comes sauntering into the kitchen. He's got a suit on and he's got his hands in his pocket. I can still remember it clear as day, like it happened yesterday. And he comes sauntering in and he leans against the cabinet with his back against the cabinet, crosses his ankles and has his hands tucked in his pocket. And he begins to strike up a conversation with me by asking me questions. And the first question he asked me, he says, "So you like horses, huh?" And I said, "Yeah, I love horses," because I had actually talked about having horses and just my passion for that. And so it wasn't a weird question. But then he proceeds to say, "So what do you feed your horses?" And I thought that was kind of a odd question, or he's really struggling to like come up with a really good line to, a pickup line. And I said, food, feed. And he nods his head and he says, waits a little bit longer. And he says, "Well, what color is the bag of the feed?" And at this point, I kind of stop what I'm doing. I was nibbling, I think, off a cheese tray or something. And I just kind of look at him like, what? And so I said, "Do you have horses?" Because I'm trying to figure out where's this conversation going. And he says, no, but I do have 5 acres of land with a barn and stall for horses on my property where I live in South Carolina. And so I go, "Oh, you live in South Carolina too?" And he goes, "Yeah." And then he tells me the city. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's literally only about 30 minutes or so from where I live in South Carolina. And then I said, "Okay, so you have land. Are you thinking about getting horses?" And he not, yeah, I'm thinking about it. So I was like, oh, that's cool. So of course for me, I'm like, well, we have something in common. So this is why the conversation is going this way. Okay, I can dig it. Still at this point, no interest because again, it's 7 months later from the first encounter. And at this time, I don't recognize this is who he is. Remember I said this gentleman, he felt familiar, but at this time, I don't recognize who I'm talking to. And so we talk about the horses, and then he stops, and I'll never forget it. He makes eye contact with me, and he gets very serious in this moment, and he points at me, and he proceeds to say my address, 11 such and such lane. And I freeze because now my brain is like fight or flight mode. Because what you talk about, Willis? How do you know my address? And so my brain is like prepare to like fight or prepare to run because this is weird. And who are you? And that's another hindsight is 2020 when we get to the end of this story and how some things unfolded and why some things could have possibly went the way they did. So I finally find words and go, how do you know? And then I stop mid-sentence because we're still locked eyes. And it slowly starts to hit me. You know him. And I said it out loud. I said, oh, I know you. And I stop there, but the thought continues in my brain. This is the guy that delivers for my horses back in South Carolina, the one 7 months ago that attempted to engage in a conversation with me. So he, at the same time that I'm having this epiphany, he's got this slow head nod going like, yeah, I've figured out who you are. Rather, I thought he figured out. Maybe now looking back on it, he knew all along who I was. I can't be sure. However, in that moment, he was asking the questions about the horses for one of two reasons. Either A, he also was trying to figure out, is this the same woman from South Carolina, a few states over, that 7 months ago came and introduced herself? Or he either might have already knew who I was and he was trying to get me to figure it out. So I always thought it was the former. But we have this aha moment like, oh my gosh, you're that person and I'm this person. And we met 7 months ago. And for me, I kind of blacked out of the conversation after all of that because now my brain is going, I will say my brain is trying to communicate with my spirit, my internal knowing of what is going on here. I'm doing the math because the math was starting to math. It was starting to make sense, but not like, God, you told me to go introduce myself to this man 7 months ago. 7, which for me, if you're spiritual, 7 is an impactful number for representative of the number of completion. So it's 7 months later. And when I got to the door, not knowing who he was at all, but internally having this knowing he was familiar, I'm like, okay, what is going on here, God? So it freaked me out. I shut the conversation down and I retreated to my bedroom for the rest of the night. Like, I was like, I need to go and sit in silence and I need to talk to God and hear God about this because what's going on? Now, let me tell you why I didn't recognize him right off, because so many differences. 2 different places. Initial meeting, South Carolina. Time of present meeting, Tennessee. 7 months later, when he came to do deliveries, he's dressed, like a farmhand, jeans, boots, tee, gloves, baseball cap. At this business retreat, he doesn't have on a baseball cap. He's clean. He's in a suit. He's dapper. He's totally different environments. So you could see how there was no immediate recognition of one another. And I also look different. If I'm going back to March 2020, when we had the first introduction, my hair was very short. No, it wasn't. I had braids. They were light colored braids. They were long midway down my back. And then 7 months later, I had taken the braids out, cut my hair, was wearing it natural. It was in its natural color. It's a whole different color. So I will say that I do feel that it was two totally different environments that he was trying to figure out, is this the same woman that I met 7 months ago? Because again, we hadn't seen each other or interacted in that capacity for 7 months either. So to be fair. So I go back to my room and I sit with God because I'm like, I need to process this. Like, God, what are you doing here? What's going on? You told me 7 months ago to go introduce myself to this man. I will even say, I didn't share the complete details of the how I even ended up in the home that I was in. That was completely orchestrated by God. And so I'm processing all of this. You told me to move into this house. You told me to take on this property. You told me to go introduce myself to this man. You told me when I said I need to 7 months later check my schedule to go to this business retreat. As I'm on the phone, you give me a green light. And then when I walk in the door, I introduce myself in the exact same manner that I did 7 months ago to someone who was a complete stranger and to someone who now is a complete stranger. But I'm getting this internal feeling in my spirit that he feels familiar. What's going on here, God? So I sit with that and it just kind of sits with me for the rest of the night. And I interact over the course of the weekend at this business retreat. There is now like this awkwardness, and it was on my part. I don't necessarily feel like he was being awkward. He actually, from that point on, was very attentive to me, but it was respectful. He, whenever we all sat down for dinner, he would poured me a glass of wine, and the chef that was in the kitchen, he was there with the chef, and he asked me, was there anything I wanted? Could he get my plate for me? He was being a complete gentleman. And so I knew, like, okay, he's definitely interested, and he is being very careful to respect the fact that we're here at a business retreat and we're associates at this point. But he's also showing me in a very respectful and non-invasive manner that I have an interest in you. And so he kind of catered to me. And it wasn't invasive. It wasn't offending. It was very kind and very sweet and very gentle in that sense of the term. And there were other people there that weekend. We interacted, but he was just always, I'm searching for the word to describe it. He just was non-invasive but clear that, there's an intent here. So when it came time to leave from the retreat, I was going back to the airport, and the host of the retreat was taking me back to the airport, and he asked, could he contact me? He asked about my flight back and when I was going to be home. And we already had one another's numbers because, again, remember 7 months prior, we're texting for business, me communicating for a service and him delivering on the business. So he politely asked me, would you mind if I checked on you to make sure you arrived back from your flight? And I thought that was very sweet and still non-invasive. And I said, yeah, sure. That's no problem. Now, before I keep moving on and go into how we started dating, I want to circle back to the importance of my friend who hosted the retreat, who was the one who called me to ask me to speak at the retreat. She and I knew each other for 8 years. She turned out to be the cousin of this gentleman. However, she had no idea that he and I interacted with where he did the deliveries to my home. And I had no clue that this was her cousin. He had no clue that she knew me. I had no clue that they were related. And I know as we move forward in the story, it's going to be like, yeah, no, because there was no information exchanged about, number one, even the presence of where I lived or what was going on. It was just, there were no holes in that. It was clearly, I want to say, for the sake of understanding, by chance, but as I'm testifying, God orders our steps and aligns everything. So from a spiritual aspect, it wasn't by chance, but she was related to him, and she also is a very close friend of mine, and none of us knew any of this. This was not discovered until, not even at the retreat, but until later on down the line when he and I engaged in dating, seeing one another. So we leave the retreat, and he does, as he said he would, checks on me as far as my flight, that I made it safe. And when I had a layover, and when I stopped for the layover, he reached out to check on me. And he says, I would love to take you on a date or take you out to dinner when I get back as well. And I said, I'd be interested in that, because now I'm interested. And when I say I'm interested, it was solely because, what are you doing here, God? It was not me going, I want to date, I want to be with somebody, I want to see where this may go. Oh, he's a good looking guy. It was none of that. It was purely me processing. God told me to introduce myself. God told me to come to this retreat. God quickened my spirit for whatever reason and had me introduce myself to the same man in 2 different places at 2 different times in the exact same manner. And there's something going on here. So I said, yeah, I'd be interested in that. So he actually got back the same night from the retreat that I did. And he says, well, if it's not too late, do you want to go to dinner? Let's do that. So got home, showered, cleaned up, dolled up, and let me see, is this part important? Yeah, I said I'm not going to leave anything out. So he came to pick me up. He already knew where I lived because, again, he did the deliveries. I gave him permission to get access into the gate at this point in time. And he showed up to pick me up. And this was my first date in years, right? Like I said, I'd been in a relationship 2 years prior, and I've been single and focused on being single. So this is my first date, and I like to dress up. You give me a reason. All I need is a reason. We're going to the grocery store. Cool. Let me grab my heels. I'm that kind of woman. Okay. So first date in a long time, or whatever this is going to be, first interaction, going out with a man in a couple years. And I got all dolled up. He shows up, not so much. Jeans, t-shirt. He's far from the dapper businessman that I met at the retreat. And I noted that. I was a little disappointed because, baby, I was bringing it. I was dressed up. I looked good. And I wasn't like super glam. I dressed casual glam. Okay. I didn't roll out all the big stunts, but I looked good. I did my hair. I did my makeup. I cleaned up pretty. And it's like he didn't make an effort. Now, I will say this. He apologized profusely because he said, I'm so sorry. When I got in, my daughter had my car. She used my car while I was gone. And when I got back, I couldn't reach her and I needed my car and it cut out on the time that when I got back from the trip and I only had time to shower, throw on something. So I gave him grace. And hindsight again is 2020. Looking back on it, would I have done differently? Yeah. I think that I would have just said, because we're going to talk about expectations. And again, as I'm talking about this, I'm going to be processing. I am processing some things myself. So if you can hear the pause and the hesitation and just trying to make it make sense. Because again, this is the marriage that made no sense. So I actually, and this is why I say I would change it, because I made him comfortable. I gave grace that I understand, you couldn't get to your car and things happen. But I wasn't going to be that woman like, well, oh my gosh, you need to do this, that. No, I gave grace. And he kept saying, I can go home and change. And I said, well, you're here now. You're here now. There's no need in doing that. You're 30, 40 minutes away and we're both here. I said, what I can do, I can go back in and I can change and I can throw on jeans and a t-shirt. And I think I was like, I'm going to keep my heels on, but I will go put on jeans and a t-shirt. And I did that to make him comfortable. Was I don't want to say wrong, but was that for me looking back, was that something that I regret doing? Yes. And not in a negative, like, oh, that was just so horrible. But what I mean, I'm speaking to us as women, when we have expectations, when we bring who we are to the table. Like, notice I said I was myself. Like, we picked a casual place. It was a place where you can dress up or you can dress casual. But even though it was a casual place, I was not stepping back from who I was and am. I love to dress up. I'm going to glam up. I don't care if we're going to, what's my joke I always say? I don't care if we're going to the Waffle House or the IHOP. I'm walking in with stilettos and a fur coat. Okay. That's just me. That's just who I am. Just for jokes or just to give you an idea of how glam I am. But I brought all of who I was that day. And so him showing up dressed in the manner that he was he showing me who he really was the suit and the tie and the business retreat. He thought enough to dress up there for that. So impressions are important. And even though this wasn't the first impression, this was our first outing together for you to bring to the table what you want me to see. And so I feel like, when you start looking back and going, hindsight is 2020, or I should have did this, or should have done that, or should have picked up on this. I should have obliged him to say, you know what? Sure. Go back home, take the time you need and get dressed the way that you feel you should be dressed. But I didn't. And so I stepped down from who I was to make him comfortable. You understand? And like I said, and at that point in time, and even in this time, I'm not like, oh, that was so horrible, I shouldn't have. This is just me processing because of where we're going in this story and how things unfolded to have a better understanding. So I gave grace and I said, look, it's cool. I can go put on jeans and t-shirt. I was really looking forward to being dressed up, but I'll make you comfortable. And I did. Okay, so now he showed up with flowers. I will give that. That was probably why I was like all googly eyed, like, oh, okay, I'll give him a break. He showed up with flowers. I love, 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 love flowers. And he showed up with these beautiful roses. I think the first ones were these pink roses, because what preceded was each time we went out, he always brought me a dozen roses, like just always brought me flowers. And this lasted every week through us dating on up through the first portion of the marriage. So I just loved it. And so we go on the date, and I remember leaving my house and getting in the car with him and leaving from my house and driving to the gate to exit out of the community that I live in. And there's a stoplight leaving out of the gate. And I remember thinking, by the time we left my house and getting to the stoplight, which was probably a 5-minute drive, I wanted to get out of the car and walk back home. And it wasn't because he did anything wrong. He was talking a lot in those 5 minutes. It was like he wanted me to know everything about his life. I've been married. I've been divorced. I have kids. I have this other child. It was just a lot in 5 minutes. And I felt like what he was doing was, he was just dumping. And I believe he wanted me to know, this is who I am, and this is what I bring to the table. And so if that's not anything you're interested in, I just want to get that out the way. He didn't say it like that, but I believe that is what his intents were. But it was so intense. 5 minutes, like I just got in the car and we're driving, and by the stoplight, I literally was like, I want to go home. I want to go home. No, but I didn't, because I was like still holding on to, listen, he hasn't done anything wrong, and let's see what God had not given me a no in my spirit. I had all of these green lights leading me to this man, or putting me in front of this man. And I wasn't hearing any no or any sirens, or there were no, there was nothing that was saying, don't even do this. And so I was curious to follow that. So we went out to dinner, and honestly, we had an amazing dinner. Like I felt my getting casual made him feel comfortable. And he apologized about it. And moving forward, he always, was dressed to match the occasion. So I gave him grace in that. But we had an amazing dinner. We laughed, we talked, we bonded over key lime pie. Like, I can't remember if he said that was his first time having key lime pie, or if that we both liked it. Either way, I just remember that night we had key lime pie and we shared it. And that became a tradition when we went somewhere on a date. When he took me out, it was like, do you guys have key lime pie? And we sort of became connoisseurs of key lime pie and critics. And this one's too sweet. This one's too tart. This one just black. So I remember that. So that was one of those things that we start building a core memory with. And I had a good time on that first date. And then we proceeded to get to know each other and continue to talk and continue to date. And I will say, in the beginning, when he pushed for it being some sort of, title, some sort of, what are we calling this? What are we doing? Where are we going with that? That's where I got standoffish. I was like, look, I'm in a space where I want to get to know you, but I also want to have the flexibility to be entertained by someone else also, because I'm not going to put all my eggs in one basket, because that's what I've done all my dating life is, and that's not to say I was wrong. It was the right mindset. I had my desire was to be married, and in desiring to be married, I had put myself in a position where I want to hear God's voice. I don't want to have men over here and men over there so that it's blocking God sending the one. And I had done all of that. And so, and after the relationship prior to this, I just went through something. It just was a really heartbreaking relationship 2 years before, and it took a lot of time to heal. So coming out of that, I was like, I'm not putting all my eggs in one basket. I want to hear God, but I want to leave the channels open to make sure this is God and not jump into something so quickly. And I felt like it was feeling too quick, too soon for me. And so there was kickback from me. That's when I started to draw back. And I was like, look, if you show any kind of, if you express any kind of love or desire to be close, I'm going to back away because I feel like that's too much too soon. And so there was kickback there. I continued to date him, but there was always this back and forth banter about, what we were, who we were going to be. So I will say I never did entertain anyone else. I will say he did not leave room for that. He made it very clear that I'm the one. I want to be the one. And I'm going to take up all your free time that you will give me so that there's no room for anyone else. So that never happened. And I will say our relationship developed very quickly, like very quickly, like 3 months quickly. We ended up getting engaged a month after we started dating. I quickly went from this is too quick, too much, too soon, to just developing and cultivating a relationship and a love for this man. We became best friends. We talked, we spent time. My son, who was now at this point, he was going into his senior year. It was still, he was going into his senior year. My son, remember I said that he was the person that would meet him out to unload the feed and everything. So because they already had communication, my son knew he was, but when I started, dating him, I was like, what is my son going to think about this? And my son he was chill with it. He was cool with it because he had already interacted with this man. He felt comfortable with his character. They apparently had laughed and joked when they were out there. So they had already started a bond prior to me even getting to know him and then date him. So all of these things were lining up like, okay, God, this is looking like and feeling like you. So I quickly went from being very standoffish to just falling for him and leaning into that. And we talked about marriage. We talked about faith. We did actually talk about business and finances. Looking back, do I feel like I dug in as deep as I should or could have? No, I didn't. We talked about the fact that he was an entrepreneur, that he was a business owner. He told me about his past business history. He told me that he was in the midst of making a really big deal with his company because he had his own company. And I trusted that. I believed that because of who I was and am. I'm an entrepreneur. I had business going on. I was handling my business. I was showing up, going to work. I was making calls. I was making moves. I was making business deals. And I saw him doing the same. Why wouldn't I trust that or believe that? And so we went to church together. And this was coming off the heels of COVID, the pandemic as well. By this time, let's see, it was October. So we got engaged sometime in November, about a month later. And the plan was never to elope or get married without telling people. the plan was to involve friends and family, and to plan this in a manner that everyone that was a part of our lives could celebrate with us. But it didn't go that way. And looking back on it, there are two factors that I feel like there are a few factors actually as to why it didn't go that way. Number one is, now, first of all, how did I end up engaged? How did I shift from no, I'm not interested in pursuing something so quickly to engaged a month later? I heard God tell me to marry him. And I know in listening to my story, my testimony, many people are going to be like, you did not hear God. You missed God. That wasn't God. Girl, that was the devil. Girl, I don't know who you heard, and let me tell you, I honestly, to this day, I've not had a soul tell me that, not to my face. However, and I mean, I don't say that in any sense, like say it to my face. Like, I don't care. I mean, I don't mean it like that. Just nobody has said it or disagreed with it. And I'm quite sure people do, because I myself have had to process through many tears and questions and whys about how this all went down and why it went down the way it did. And did I miss God? And but I will 100% firmly stand on to the day God calls me home and I stand before him and he can possibly then give me all the answers that he didn't give me here on earth. I will go to my grave knowing I 100% heard God say to marry this man. And it's so interesting because, again, how do we get from I want to take my time, I want to take it slow, to you're getting engaged? If you listen to what I'm saying, everything was a directive from God. Go move into this community. Move into this house. Go introduce yourself to this man. Go to this business retreat where this man is at. Go on the date. Yes, he's the one. So I know God's voice. I sit with him and I talk to him and I listen to him and I have a relationship with him. And I know when I know what I'm hearing. One of my favorite scriptures is John 2:5. And it was where Jesus performed his first miracle of turning water into wine. And Jesus himself at this wedding party told his mama, I'm not ready. And his mama paid him no attention, as a mama does. And she basically looked at the caterer, so to speak, at that wedding. And she said, whatever he says unto you, do it. She was basically telling them what Jesus says to you, regardless of what anybody else is saying or hearing or thinking or what it looks like. What he says to you, you do it. Other people might not understand it. They might try to process it. They might try to pull it apart. They might say, if I was you, I would never do that. What he says unto you, do it. And I heard God tell me, marry him. Now, the significance of this is, remember I said I've dated. I've dated in the past. I've been engaged in the past. And dating, and even those that I were engaged to, God said no. No. Crystal clear no on each of those men prior to meeting who is now my ex-husband, who became my husband, is now my ex-husband. This was the very first yes I've gotten in seeking God's face on, is this the person? Is this my person? Is this who you created me to be a helpmeet for? I got a yes. Number one, that freaked me out. I cried, y'all. I cried because I'd gotten used to hearing God say no. And me, I'm a faith and an obedience person. What does that mean? Faith is my foundation. I trust. Faith is a blind trust in what we can't see. I believe in a God that we can't see. Okay? I walk by faith and not by sight. And then I'm a person of obedience. Scripture says obedience is better than sacrifice. Sacrifice would have been marrying one of those men that asked me to marry them and wanting what I wanted, but hearing God say no and not knowing why I got the no and overriding that and then possibly ending up in something that was no good. Okay. But obedience overrides sacrifice. And I obeyed every time. Now here's God telling me, here's your yes. And that scared me. It scared me to my core. It shook me. And you can believe I went to God every day in my prayer room asking him, is this you? God, give me a sign. God, show up. God, I don't want to miss you. God, I'm not rushing into this. God, I've never been married. You know my heart's desire. God, 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 God. I sought him. I was not, nor have I ever been, nor will I ever be a woman who is so focused and intent on being married or with someone that I will just jump at the first person who asks or shows up. I've never been that woman. So when this came along and I heard yes, all I knew was if God is telling me yes, then he's responsible for what goes on. And I'm going to obey that because I want what God wants for me. There is a permissive will of God and there is a perfect will of God. Permissive will is, let's say I'd married one of the men that had asked me to marry them before, and I heard God give me a no. Number one, I would have been in disobedience, but I didn't. And then the marriage is great, but then down the line, something starts to happen in that marriage, whatever it could be. It could be infidelity, or it could be a list of things. You just think of the wildest thing that could go left field and result in me being unhappy, or it may not have even to this extent. It doesn't always have to be unhappy when we choose to disobey God. It could have been, I could have married one of those men and been the happiest I've ever been my entire life. But let's say being with that man, I didn't walk in my fullest potential of the calling God had on my life. And I didn't reach the people that God said I needed to reach by being with someone who wasn't taking me down the path, that leading me down the path God wanted me to go. You understand? So it didn't even have to be negative or even seen, but there's things that when we get to heaven, God will reveal, well, you didn't take this step. And so this was missed. And this might not even impact me. It might have been what I'm doing right now. Souls. I took God's yes and married the man God told me to marry. And while it's turned out nowhere near I would have ever expected, I'm sitting, hosting a podcast, talking and telling my story of what I've endured and what I've overcome. And it's helping women. This is God's plan for my life. Why? Why? Because he's sovereign. Why, Takiya, did you have to go through this? Why, Takiya, would God tell you to marry someone who it's going to turn out not the way you want it? God's sovereign. He's sovereign, but he always has a purpose and a plan. And he has to use people that will walk in faith and will obey him for the sake of other people. You think about Joseph. Joseph is one of my favorite stories in the Bible. Joseph was hated by his siblings. He was loved by his father and mother, hated by his siblings. Hated so much jealousy and envy that they plotted to kill him. And then instead of killing him, they threw him into a pit and then sold him into slavery. And then in slavery, ended up being put in the palace, but then lied and said that he raped the Pharaoh's wife and then thrown in the dungeon in jail. But when you fast forward that story, the very family that hated him, God positioned him to become ruler over all the land only under Pharaoh, with all kind of wealth and a family and children, wife, and was able to send for his family to come be taken care of. The same family that hated him, envied him. So why does God do things the way that he does? He's sovereign, but he has a plan for his people. He has a plan for everyone. And he has to use Jesus. Jesus was the sacrifice for us. Why did Jesus have to come to God in the form of a man, and Jesus Christ have to come and manifest tangible flesh just to be crucified for us, for souls, to put us in direct relationship with God? So trust me, I have asked God, I have cried many a tears, but I've come out stronger on the other side. So I said all that to say, I heard God's yes, and I obeyed. Now, I got cold feet. Everything, and I mean everything lined up. Everything up through this was lining up. Introduce yourself to this man, go to this conference, date this man, say yes to this man. Even so much so, let me tell you, one day, the day before we were to get married, I was freaking out. Even the wedding date aligned up. We prayed about the wedding date. That aligned up. The pastor of the church that I was attending at the time, I talked to his wife. His schedule was available. We got to, we planned to do it on the water, which I love to be on the water. It was a fall wedding, which I always said I wanted to be married in the fall. It was just a beautiful sunny, everything lined up. Birds were chirping, harps were playing. It was beautiful. It was all God. And the day before, I got cold feet. I was freaking out. And I remember on the commute from the home to my business was about 45-minute, close to an hour drive at this point. And every day I would pass this church on the way to my business. And there was a marquee outside the front of the church. They would put, their scriptures or their quotes or their hours or what have you. You've seen them. But on this marquee for months, literal months, it was, "Congratulations on your graduation, Deja." It said that. And I remember that because every time I was like, it's been like forever. Like, are they going to check? Did anybody else graduate? It was just something that sat there for so long. And I was like, they need to update that marquee. The reason that's so significant and why I remember it is because the day before the wedding, but the day before the marriage, because we didn't have a wedding. It was just going to be an intimate, just our kids and us. And then he had promised me a bigger wedding, but we wanted to marry because we wanted to move in. We wanted to consolidate and live in one home. So it was like, if we're going to do this, let's do it right. And so I was writing and I see this marquee and I was praying. I actually was praying and crying and telling God, if this is really you, like if you're really telling me to marry this man, I need a sign. Like, God, I don't ever ask you for signs, but people in the Bible prayed and asked for signs, and I need you to give me a sign. I need you to give me something that tells me to calm me because I'm freaking out. Send a person, send me somebody and tell me. And I was like, no, don't send a person because I'm not going to believe that. I'm going to question it, but I need you to tell me, God. Like, I was freaking out. I get past this to this marquee, and lo and behold, they've changed it. All of a sudden, it's now changed. And the sign says Proverbs 3:5. Trust in the Lord with your whole heart and do not lean to your own understanding. Why was that sign so significant? Earlier that morning in prayer, when I was boohoo crying, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure, God? Please, God, be sure. Is this you? I don't want to miss you. I don't want to miss you. I heard God whisper Proverbs 3:5 to me. And this peace and this calm just settled over me. And God talked to me about, don't try to figure this out for yourself. Don't lean to your own understanding. I know it seems quick. I know it's not making sense, but trust me. Don't lean to your own understanding. We had that conversation that morning in my prayer room. And now I'm driving and I asked God for a sign, which I never did. And he gives me a literal sign, something that he knows I pay attention to every time when I drive past it. And it's been like that for months. And now it has the same scripture. And that same peace flooded me, flooded my car. And I was like, I'm going to marry him. God's telling me to do this. And so the next day, I picked a fight. No, I'm sorry. I went home that night and picked a fight. I went home and picked a fight because in my flesh, my brain was not fathoming. This is too soon. This is too quick. We met 7 months ago. We interacted for a second. We've been on a few good dates. This is too soon. My spirit, my heart, my flesh, my mind, everything was battling. And even with all that peace, I went home that night and I began to talk to him about, do you think this is too soon? Why are we doing this? I don't know if I'm ready. Da-da-da-da. I remember I kept going in until I was satisfied that I had picked a fight with this man. I wanted him to call it off. Now, you know what? I need to back up. Thank you, Holy Spirit. I need to back up because I said I'm going to tell everything. Leading up to during the dating process, I was always in fight or flight mode. You'll hear me talk about that because that's just psychologically, that is the body's way of handling some sort of trauma or something happens, scary or what. It's your body's way of responding. Are you going to run or flee because you feel in danger or a threat? Or are you going to stand your ground and fight? And that doesn't always mean physically. Like, are you verbally going to attack? Are you going to just stand strong and stand your ground? It's not always a physical thing, but it's a fight or flight mode. During the course of our dating, and I would say this is a big part of why and how I fell in love with this man. Because in order to marry him, there needed to be love there as well. I mean, yeah. There was love there. Like I said, I went from let's just move slow to God going, this is your person, and us communicating and getting to know each other and him opening my heart up. And what was so impactful that helped to open my heart up is during the stages of dating, like I seemed to every one of my fears that I had gone through, everything that I had endured in past relationships that I felt strongly that I had healed through, it started coming out with this person. Only this person. I had worked really hard at the trauma from my childhood, the trauma from my youth, trauma from young adulthood. I'd worked really hard on that, and I've never been a person to rebound, date someone, or just jump in a relationship really quickly because I just want to be with somebody. I always did a lot of self-work, always have, always will. So I don't date unless I know I'm free and clear with no baggage to do that, right? But with him, all this stuff started coming out that hadn't come out since I was in my early 20s. And at this time, meeting him, I was 43. Okay. So why 20 years later is all of these, it wasn't insecurities. It was, let me give examples. Well, it was commitment. It was fear. It was fear of commitment. And what's crazy is, again, I talk about, I dated other people, I was engaged. There was no fear there. I was ready. But with this individual, it was because I'm getting this yes and this go from God. That was really scary to me. It was like, this is really it. And I would run. Like anytime he would try to get close to me in the sense of breaking down a wall or us being close, it just pushed me away, and I would argue about it, or I would just run and go, let's just take a break, or I don't know if I want this. And there was even a time I can remember being at his house and we were in his bathroom and we were having a conversation. And I just remember, I don't even remember what it was about, but I just remember crying, having this meltdown. And I remember him, before he reached over to hug me, he asked me permission. He said, can I hug you? Can I hug you? Can I hold you? Because I had talked to him previously about the fact that I had come from a history of being in an abusive relationships, and that I know why it came up, because we actually had an argument. And again, I don't even remember what exactly the argument or the disagreement was about. It wasn't anything like super awful at this point in time, but I don't recall it. If God brings it back to me, then I'll share it, no problem. But we had a disagreement, an argument. And in that disagreement, he raised his voice. And I remember it triggered me. And I said, look, you cannot handle me that way. You cannot yell at me. You cannot step into my personal space and get in my face. You cannot do those things to me. You need to be careful. You need to watch how you handle me, because those things are triggering to me. And that's something that I don't like, men that cannot communicate their feelings without yelling. Do not do that to me. And so in this particular instance, we were having a conversation. It wasn't an argument. I, for the life of me, can't remember what it was, but I had a meltdown, and him knowing what I had said previously about watch how you handle me, he was asking permission. Can I hug you? Can I hold you? And I let him. And I remember just sinking to the floor and him going down the floor with me, just holding me until we were sitting on the floor and he was holding me in his arms on the floor. And I share that to say, because leading up to the I do's, all of this stuff started coming out of me that I had not dealt with in years, that again, I thought I'd dealt with, but why? And I remember telling him that, why? I don't know why with you, why is this stuff coming out? And so we did get with a friend of mine in ministry that did premarital counseling. Again, the timeline is very quick. Met, and then we got engaged, and then we ended up marrying at 3 months. But prior to so let me back up. I'm bouncing all over the place. I did not marry him when we had it initially planned, because I went and picked that fight, because my fears were coming out of me. And I used to be someone that had a problem with commitment. I would run, I would get to that place, and I'm getting this yes with God. And God's giving me scriptures and signs and literally telling me yes and all this stuff. And I picked a fight because I was in fear. And honestly, I remember the next day, the day that the marriage was supposed to happen, I called and spoke with the pastor's wife, and she was like, if you're not ready, don't do it. We love you. We can change the date. We can cancel it. Takiya, take your time with this. And I did. And I called it off. And I do remember he was very brokenhearted. He was very not upset in a mean upset, but just upset. He was hurt. I remember feeling that and seeing that. But I told him, gosh, this feels like an episode of Love is Blind. I don't know if y'all watched that or heard of that, but I just finished season 6. Sounds very reminiscent, timeline and all. But anyway, he was very hurt. And I saw that. And I just remember telling him, like, look, I just need some more time, and I'm not leaving you. I'm not breaking things off. I still want this. Let's just plan for it, because also, again, I wasn't getting the wedding. It was like, we're going to do this because, the timeline, we're dating and we want to move in together and we want to begin our life. And, he had told me that financially he wasn't in the place to give me the wedding that I wanted. He was working on this major contract, this multi-million-dollar contract, and I will give you the wedding of your dreams when you want it. And we both mutually desired. It was not, he can't force me to do anything that I want to do. He did not force me to marry him quicker or anything. But I called it off the first time, and we decided to just keep dating and waiting. And eventually I decided, he let me lead on that. And I decided, yes, let's go ahead and get married. I feel strongly enough about this. And at the time I was living with him. And so I had my conviction of, you're living together like husband and wife, and you're not. Like, you heard God tell you to marry him and you freaked out, and this is not okay. This is not okay that you're doing this. So go ahead and get married. And we literally woke up one day, got dressed, and we went to the courthouse and we got married. We got married, and I was confident. I was happy. I meant every bit of my vows. I felt like, yes, I wanted friends and family there with me, but I'm in this and I love this man. And we have been doing counseling, and there's little parts that I danced around also, because there was a lot going on in a short time. Like, God was still confirming. Anytime we went out dating, we weren't even engaged or hadn't divulged that to anybody, people were asking, how long have you guys been married? You're such a beautiful couple. I see the glow of God on you. I mean, these are people, complete strangers that didn't know us, that would just see us out in town together. And again, we started counseling together. We started premarital counseling. We were doing the work. And so it wasn't just two people met and married. And we were doing that, and married couples were inviting us to hang out with them. We were getting prophetic word from people that God would send that, again, knew none of our story, did not know any. People assumed that we were married, or people assumed that we were dating before we even divulged anything to anyone. So we had all of these affirmations that you're going in the right direction. So we got married, and I was happy. Do I feel like this is the happiest day of my life? I can't say, because I don't think I've gotten to the happiest day of my life. But I was happy. I was happy, and I was assured, and I felt affirmed, and I felt validated, and I felt like God was in this. Now, here's where it begins to unravel. Boom, boom, boom. And it's like, wow, so quickly. We married, and we left the courthouse, and two significant things that stood out to me the day that we married. Number one, when we did our vows, not saying it meant more to me or it was more special to me than him, but I teared up. I cried when I spoke my vows. I was very emotional. I felt very moved. And with him, I felt like it was going through the motions. And I'm not in his head. I mean, he had a smile. He had the biggest smile on his face the whole time, like a kid in the candy store, like a kid who woke up on Christmas and got exactly what he wanted for Christmas. He was in the moment. But something about the vows, VOWS, it just felt like I'm going through the motions. I don't know. And I could be over analyzing because I'm not in his head. But number two, when we left the courthouse, got in the car, and we were going to go to have a celebratory lunch together, we get about 10 minutes up the road in the car, and we're having this conversation, and he randomly says to me, I think I signed my name wrong on the marriage certificate. And I'm looking at him like, what? Who signs their own name wrong? Don't you know your name? And that was one of the most important documents that you will ever sign in your life. How do you sign your name wrong? What do you mean you sign it wrong? So then he says, I think I was just nervous. I think how do you sign your name wrong? And he says, I was just nervous and, or excited. And I just think I put my middle name as my first name. And, and the significance of that is he has two middle names. He has his first name, and then he has two middle names, and then he has his last name. And his two middle names are, so he's got his first and two middle. So he's got three names that he can play around with there, right? So I'm like, okay, maybe, okay. In the excitement and the nervousness, okay, we'll go with that. And I said, we'll look at it, when we get it. And we get it. And sure enough, it's signed wrong. He's interchangeably signed his middle name. One of his middle names is his first name, and blah, blah, blah. That's a point to pay attention to as we move forward in this story. Because you'll realize, as I quickly did, that things began to feel very calculated and intentional. But he signed his name wrong. So I chalked it off as, okay, well, you just, nervous excitement. Maybe we can fix it. Doesn't change that we're married. Or are we even married because it's signed wrong? But we went on to celebrate, and we went on to begin our lives together as a married couple. In the process, he's still in the midst of working on this big old deal, according to him, multi-million-dollar deal with his company. And I'm continuing to proceed with my business and the growth of my business and doing what I do. And life seems good. I am now a wife, and we're planning behind the scenes. I'm like, I don't want this to be a secret. It was never supposed to be a secret. I want for friends and family, close friends and family, to know that we are married. It's not a secret, but we did it so that we can begin our life together, and we will plan this big wedding, because also this is my first and only marriage to date. 43 years of my life, I've been single in that aspect, and I've waited and sought God for who He created me for and who's to be my husband, my spouse, my helpmeet, my protector, my provider, all of those things. So this is getting married at the courthouse was not the plan. That's not how I saw it. That was not the dream. That was not the vision. But He's promising me, you will get that, and you will get it bigger and better than you ever thought it to be. And so I was holding on to that. And the marriage itself was never intended to be a secret. It was to be told to close friends and family. And then we planned that marriage, that honeymoon. He had even promised, I had moved out of my home into his, which was further away from business and friends and family, which I wasn't happy about. But he'd even promised, we'll move back into the community that you love so that you can have your horses again and you can have the home. All of this stuff was a promise and it was in the plan. So behind the scenes, I'm still planning my wedding. But as time begins to elapse, distractions start to settle into the marriage and the home. And the first thing that came about as a huge problem was 2 months into the marriage. I come across a live chat with my then husband, who is now my ex-husband, and another woman that he's holding a conversation with real time. What do you mean, Takiya? I bought him a laptop for Christmas, and the laptop stayed at home in our kitchen. Well, sometimes he took it with him, but for the most part, he kept it like on a little working station in the kitchen. And we both used it. I had my own computer, laptop, office upstairs, but if I was downstairs and needed to check something really quick, it was common use. So I opened the laptop this day to go check some emails, and a little window opens up, another tab opens up, and it's his social media. And he's at work, he's away from home, but he's apparently on his cell phone, on his social media. And he is having a conversation with a woman on his cell phone, and I'm at home on his laptop watching this conversation take place. We're 2 months married when this happens. And the discussion is he's basically talking to this woman and referring to me as his ex. 2 months into being married, I'm his ex to another woman. And he's basically telling her, I just need a friend to talk to. I'm in this, my ex, she just wants me to take care of her. And I've put her in this home and I'm giving her everything that I feel like I should. And we're just butting heads about it. And I just needed another friend to talk to about it. And, the woman proceeds to ask him questions. Well, she doesn't help out with this and why that. And, he's painting it like I'm just taking advantage of him, which was far from the truth because I have and had and always will have my own. And I brought a lot to the table. As people say, baby, I brought the table. But he was painting it as if I was this burden to him. And the reason that conversation even started was because he and I had had a discussion earlier that day or the day before about a disagreement that he was responsible for the increase on the amount of fuel that it was taking for me and my son to travel now an hour to our destination because we agreed to move into his home, which was an hour away, further out the way than where we lived in my home. We had discussed all of this and my concerns about any extra financial burdens or him being the provider and the household. And he said he would take care of us. And he said, I'm not going to add anything extra on your plate. And because we now live 30 minutes further from my son getting to school back and forth, he had his own vehicle. He drove to school in the morning. He drove home and then he went to work. So this is adding another set of bills to what I was doing. And because we chose his home, because he wanted us to move there, he promised that I will be the provider for that. I will take care of that extra burden, that extra debt. Your fuel also, driving 2 times a day, driving an hour there and an hour back, and your son an hour there and an hour back. That's a lot of time and energy and another expense. And when we discussed it, it was now all of a sudden, well, I can't do that. And he didn't say he wouldn't do that. He said he can't. But he made it like I'm just not going to do that. And he never provided any insight as to, I can't afford to do that, or that's an expense that I can't take care of. He never came across that way, but that's really what it was. So it seemed arrogant to me because he was not providing any sort of, this is why I can't do it. I'm not going to do it. That's how he presented himself. I'm not going to do that. That's your responsibility. And that upset me. It upset me because it was opposite of everything you told me. It was opposite of everything he promised me. And it was also, it had shifted my son and I's life. And I just didn't think it was very honorable of him. And we had had a conversation about this. And now I'm watching him in real time have a conversation with this woman and complain about the promises that he made to me. He never referred to me as his wife even. I was just an ex-girlfriend. So there were all kind of red flags in that conversation. So that day, 2 months into being married, I closed that laptop and I went on about my day and I waited for him to get home to talk. Nope, wait, I'm sorry. Let me back up. I pulled out my cell phone camera and I recorded all of the conversation and screenshot it. And then I closed the laptop and proceeded to go about my day and reach out to an attorney to find out about getting an annulment. And I waited for him to get home so that I could share this information with him. He comes home and I didn't treat him any indifferent. I was my same old self. I was very calm because my mind was made up. I'm getting out of this. And he comes home and I said, let's go for a walk. We took the dogs for a walk. And I said, listen, I said, I love you. And I married you because I love you. I married you because we invited God into this. And because God is in this, he's going to always speak up about things that are going on. I just believe that. We've invited him into this marriage and he's going to point out the flaws. And I proceed to tell him about what I saw, what I found on his laptop. And he went silent. He didn't get angry. He didn't try to lie his way out of it. What he did, however, was deflect and change the subject. He made it about him. He said he apologized and he said he didn't know why he did the things that he did. And he has a hard time remembering things and it's his mental health and he needs medication and he just doesn't know why he did it. And this is a lot to take in because, wait a minute, you did not talk to me about having any mental health issues or being on medication. Never, ever, not once in our time of talking, leading up in the dating phase and talking about health and things like that. I've shared with you that I've had a hysterectomy and I can't have children. And I've talked to you about my family and you've talked to me about your family, but never, ever once did you ever discuss with me that you feel like something is wrong with you and that you need medication. What medication? So the conversation takes a whole other direction. And we're talking about now he's revealing to me that he was hit in the head as a child by a car. He rode his bike and got hit by a car and he hit his head, and that the doctors had told his mother that he possibly may have some problems with his brain or with memory or functioning later on down the line. And of course, I'm empathetic, like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that happened to you as a child. And I'm so sorry that happened. And I'm so sorry that you are going through this. It sounds silly. It sounds like, wait a minute, why did you ignore what happened? I just did. Because this is an individual who knew how to manipulate a situation and knew how to manipulate the mind, and knew how to deflect. And he also, going back to the day, remember I said as the keynote speaker, I'm talking and I'm sharing and pouring out my whole literal life. I gave him the blueprint. I gave him my blueprint and how to follow, how to handle and deal with me. Remember I said also, I told him marriage, this is not how you handle me. I gave him the blueprint, and he saw someone that I can attach to, and I know her weaknesses because she shared them all with me, and I can play on that. That's how I see it. I didn't see it at that moment, in that moment, but looking back on it now, that's how I see it. So now, instead of dealing with, you were having a conversation with another woman, and how far was that going to go? And are there other women out there? And what else have you lied to me about? Now, the trauma in me tells me that I need to understand the trauma in him. And that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm sorry you went through this. Well, we need to get you help. I'm by your side. I took vows for sickness and health, rich or poor, all of that. Now my heart is in a position of, oh, this poor man, and I'm a nurturer, and you can't leave him. He's sick. You're his wife. You need to take care of him. So I did. I stayed, and we walked through and talked through that. And I said, what I did, circled back, and I said, well, I do want you to correct things with this woman, and I will be right there with you when you correct it, because how come you refer to me as your ex and I'm your wife? And does she know I'm your wife? Do people know that you have a wife? Like, we haven't had our wedding yet, but my people know that you're my husband. So we get back to the house, and all of a sudden now he can't find her online. You know, we're searching the name or what have you, and she's nowhere there. It's like he's been blocked or whatever. And I know he, in some way, shape, or form, reached out. I probably am the crazy ex. And if she reaches out to you, don't talk to her. So you need to block her. I'm pretty sure that's what went on. So that was the first incident where the marriage didn't feel so secure. That was 2 months in. And as the marriage proceeded, there became too many incidents to even keep track of. And I'm going to try to walk through these as quickly as possible and not miss anything out, because this is a lot. This is a long story. So that was the first incident. And then the second incident, major incident, came when we had an argument about his youngest child. At the time, he had a 2-year-old daughter. And remember I said on the first date in the car ride, 5 minutes in, he just vomited everything out about his relationships, his life, his divorce, his kids, all of this stuff. He had told me about the 2-year-old daughter. So I was aware. All his other children are adults, young adults. I mean, I'm in my 40s. He was in his mid 40s. So we both had young adult children. But he was very intent on making sure I knew, look, I have a 2-year-old also. And he had expressed that he wasn't with the 2-year-old's mother, but he had expressed to me that my family, all of my family, doesn't know about the 2-year-old. And I remember thinking, well, why don't they know? And this was during the dating phase. We talked about all of this. Well, why don't they know about the 2-year-old? Why would you hide the fact that you have another child? And he said that he was embarrassed about it. He was ashamed because he's got young adult kids. And now here he is out here, in his words, sleeping with a random woman and then having a child with her. And he said, I was embarrassed and ashamed about it. But and of course, I was like, do you take care of this child? You need to take care of it. And he said that he did. So there was communication there. This was all before the marriage. We had talked about it. But now you fast forward into the marriage. And one of the things that when we talked about it was okay, a part of his embarrassment and shame was he also revealed, I didn't tell my family because this woman is married. And so I have a child with a married woman. And I was like, okay, well, does the husband know? And we had all these conversations, and yes, he does. And, I take care of her, and so we had conversations. I'm like, well, you need to talk to your family. They need to know you have a child. This child didn't ask to be brought here. And I understand being embarrassed and shamed, but what happened, and you just got to do the right thing by this child. And respectfully, I get it that there's another level of this layer to this because she's got a husband, and that's friction also. So anyway, in the marriage, the second big incident was an argument about his interacting with his 2-year-old's mother. He had promised me, when I communicate with her, or if I go see my child, or if I bring child to the home, this was prior to us getting married. He was like, I'll let you know, what's going on. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to be open with you. And he wasn't. There was an incident where we had a discussion, and that's why I ended up crying on the bathroom floor. I remember it now, because he lied to me about meeting with her. And I couldn't understand why he was lying to me about meeting with his child's mother to see his child, and the location that he chose, and why he felt like he had to lie to me. I didn't care. I truly didn't care. If you are going to spend time with your child and you said what you mean and there's nothing going on, then it's not my job to play detective and monitor you. At least that's how I looked at it. Okay. So one day he ended up getting caught in a lie, and I went down that hole with him, and it turned out that he had gone to see his child's mother. And again, understand me, at this time and place, I didn't have a problem with that, but I had a problem with you lying to me about it and your whereabouts, and why would you lie about this? And so that turned into a big old argument, because he, in essence, was basically telling me that this is how it's going to be, and we're just comfortable with doing things this way. Because the conversation of child support had come up also. That was a big thing of why he wasn't telling people, and he was handling things in the manner he was. He didn't want things documented legally with his child. And I had a problem with that. And I had urged him, you need to talk to her and get on child support, because there was some friction between she and him, the child's mother also. And I was trying to be that wife and that woman, like, take care of your kid and, respect the boundaries there, do what you need to do. And the easiest thing, so there's no conflict, is why don't you just put yourself on child support? And he didn't want to do that. He didn't want to do that. And it started to unravel that his family actually did know about the 2-year-old. I had a conversation with his sister, and his sister brought it up. And I was shocked, because here it is. I'm thinking I'm respecting him handling his business and taking my advice to do what he needs to do. And he's going to tell his family. But I have a conversation with his sister, and she rolls off her tongue that she knows. And the sister proceeds to tell me that her version of the story did not corroborate with his, and he was just lying to me. And I couldn't understand, why would he lie to me about this woman and this child? And I'm not going to spend all my time talking about that, but that was the second introduction to, this marriage is a problem and this marriage is making no sense. Now, another door of conflict opened after that, because that is really where a lot of the friction and disorder entered into our marriage. When that whole thing unraveled, and he lied to me about the two women, I had never gone through his phone or questioned when he was on the phone or any of that, because I honestly, and I don't say this boastfully, but I'm very confident in who I am. And I'm very sure of who I am and what I bring to the table. And I viewed it as, I'm the good thing. He who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor of the Lord. I heard God tell me, yes, go marry him. I'm the good thing. Through me, God is going to send favor and blessings to your life. And I'm confident in my looks and my walk and my talk and what I bring to the table and my relationship with God. So I never had insecurities about another woman. My thing is, if you want to be with another woman or there's another woman involved here, then I will remove myself from the equation, because I'm not a pick me and I'm not second to anyone. And so I never questioned it when he, in the dating phases, said, I'm going to give you the access code to my cell phone. You can go through my cell phone anytime you want. I remember thinking, okay, great, but I don't need to do that. And I just never paid it any attention. But after all of this stuff started happening, I woke up one night and I just was like, well, I'm going to go through his phone. And I picked the phone up and I went and sat upstairs in my chair in my prayer room. And I went through the text messages. And I was shocked. I was appalled. I was floored. I was taken aback. I was angry. I shed tears because text after text, dating back from while we're married to while we were dating to while we were at the retreat to even back to the time that he sauntered into my backyard and God told me, go introduce yourself. Conversations with different women, multiple women. Sexual conversations, conversations about loving one another, conversations about commitment to just one woman, but texts aligning up with same days and times where he's balancing different women. I see all this stuff and I'm disgusted. And I'm sitting in my prayer room, in the very chair, in the very room that I heard God say, marry him. And I can't understand for the life of me, God, why? Is this what I'm supposed to get? And I remember closing this. Oh, no, let me back up. I got my phone and I recorded everything and I screenshot everything and I sent everything to my little file for my attorney, because I'm going to hold on to all of this stuff. And I went back downstairs and I put his phone on the charger on the nightstand and I crawled in bed and I went to sleep. And we had a conversation about it. We were in counseling. We had continued counseling and we did continue our therapy and our couples counseling, our marriage, our ministry counseling. And I brought all this up. And what did he do? He deflected. He deflected. He made it about him. He made it about his mental health. He went through messages and, profusely said, no, you read that date wrong, or no, that's not even it, or no, that was from last year, or no, this wasn't going on, that wasn't going on. And for a while, there was a lot of tension in the home, a lot of tension. And we got into an argument and I left. This is the first time I left. And I was like, I'm not going to do this with you. And I left and I went to a friend's house and I stayed with a friend for a couple of nights. And talk to her about things. And she's actually like a big sister to me. And I talked to her, and she was very encouraging and very supportive. And she's wisdom because she's older than me as well. And she said some things that were very settling to me. And she's like, I support you in whatever direction you take, but you married. And if you want to fight for this, maybe there's some things that he's worked through. We had a conversation about it. And I talked to the minister with counseling and everything. And everybody's very supportive of me making the decision I want to make. And I decided I'm in this. I waited all this time to be married. I prayed and I sought God, and I feel like I heard God. And in retrospect, parallel to some of these things happening, there was all this other good stuff happening that was still screaming, this is God. Just give it some time. Takiya, I'm working in him. I'm using you. I'm uprooting. I'm revealing this stuff so it can be dealt with. And at the time, and even after, for me, I felt so rejected, not by this man, but by God. I felt so disappointed. I felt so hurt. And I felt like I wasn't enough because I'm like, God, is this all I deserve? You told me to marry this man. And all I'm getting, I haven't even had a whole year of happiness. I didn't get the wedding. I didn't even get the proposal that I wanted. I got a proposal. It was sweet. But after he proposed, I went in the house and cried because it wasn't me. It wasn't adding up. And I felt so little, like this is all I deserve. Like, God, don't I deserve love? Don't I deserve love? Like, I heard you and I waited and I obeyed even in my fear, but I'm just getting heartbreak and misled. And at this point in the marriage, my ex was also, who was my husband at the time, was starting to use the vulnerability that I had shared with him against me. Please don't yell at me. That triggers me. That scares me, or it angers me. And he would intentionally yell at me. Please don't step in my personal space. Please don't step towards me or make it seem like you're going to hit me, because that terrifies me or it triggers me and takes me to a bad place. And he did that on purpose. Please don't, after we have a disagreement or if you're angry with me, please don't ignore me, because I was ignored as a child growing up in my home. My father, my stepfather, he would pretend I wasn't there when he was upset with me. He would sit at the dinner table with my mom and my sister, and they would have these conversations and act like I didn't exist. Please don't do that to me. And my husband, the man who God said marry, the man I had prayed for years for, and I gave God my yes, would walk in the house after a day of work, open the door, and come in with headphones on and walk past me like he didn't see me. And he would ignore me to the point that it was so triggering and heartbreaking that I was like, I need to leave. I can't stay in this environment. He's not making this a happy home. He's allowing the entrance of discord and drama and stress to enter into this home, and everything that I asked him to not do to me, he's doing to me because I'm calling him out on his flaws and his wrong and his inability to carry through on the promises he said he would be to me. And I'm getting rejected, and I'm getting psychologically and emotionally and mentally abused because I'm here, your good thing, forgiving you and telling you I'll fight with you as long as you want to stop being this person. Because as time went on, God started revealing the flaws in him. God started uprooting stuff in me that needed healing, and God started uprooting stuff in him that needed healing. And this is what I say again, I will go back to, I fell in love with him because as God started uprooting the things in me, the fear of commitment and all that stuff that I thought I dealt with, he was there. He was there and he fought with me through it. And he promised, I'm going to be here. I won't leave you. I love you for who you are, Takiya. Everything you've gone through, all your flaws, everything you've shared with me, all the hurt, all the heartache, all the pain, all the letdown, all the drama, all the stress. I'm not going to be that to you. And he showed me that. And he showed me that. He stuck by my side. And now I see it as, okay, God, now you're uprooting the muck and the mess that's in him. And you chose me because you need a woman that will give you your yes for this man. You chose me as his good thing because I'm confident and strong enough and connected and rooted enough in you that I'll obey you and I'll hear you and I'll see the heart of this man instead of all the flaws. And you can use me to help in the process of his healing, like you helped use him in the process of mine. I understood that. I accepted that. I stuck with my commitment to stay married to this man. However, the entrance of the adversity of the fact that this is no longer what God wants for me came in when it started to kill me. When it started to get so debilitating, and the fact that he was not obeying God. So that brought in more problems. Lying, deceiving, cheating, manipulating. That first disagreement when I left was because of an argument. And like I said, I didn't like that. I didn't like the atmosphere he was creating in the home. And even when I left, I did my best to be a godly wife. Listen, let me tell you, this is where I'm going. This is where I'm going to be. Even if you want to come check on me as my husband, this is where I'm at and you're welcome to. But until you get the atmosphere right in our home, where it's not uncomfortable, where I don't feel threatened, where I don't feel intimidated, where you are not ignoring me, where you're not communicating with other women, I can't be here. It's damaging to me. It's debilitating to me. And so when I came back home, we always made up, talked about it, worked through it, go to counseling, go before God in prayer, because that's another thing. The aspect of God was there. This man prayed with me. This man prayed for me. This man prayed over my son, for our children, for his children, my children, our children collectively. He did all of that. I loved getting up in the morning, seeing him off to work. I'd make him lunch, a smoothie, pack my son's lunch. He would hug us and pray together, and we go. There were good aspects in there. But when things that needed to be addressed had to be talked about and communicated, by far, he was no communicator. By far did he want to take accountability. By far did he recognize that God was going, look, I have a woman here that wants to work through this with you. Be honest with her. Heal, son, heal. Because that's what God wanted for us. And he just wouldn't. The lies kept coming. The manipulation kept coming. The deception kept coming. And eventually dishonor, where he was disrespecting me to other women. He was allowing other women to disrespect me and disregard me. He just wasn't stepping up to the plate. And there was a day that came that, let's see. Okay. So another incident that stands out. And this one, This one still shakes me to my core. It actually still brings tears to my eyes because it stung like that bad. Like it felt like a kick to the stomach. So there's a night in particular, we're having a disagreement about something he hasn't told me the truth about. I will skim across this. One of those conversations was that business he said he had, that deal he said he had. It wasn't. It wasn't true. None of it was true. So this came out in the course of the marriage as well. So there's a lot that we were dealing with. And I'm a newlywed, and the finances that he said he had all of a sudden weren't there. All of a sudden they're gone. All of a sudden the dream about the wedding, I can't do that. I don't have it. And we have to keep pushing it back. It was all crumbling very quickly. And it was in less than 3 months' time, all this is going on of being married. And it's a lot to process. And this night, we got into an argument about, he told me things with the business weren't what he said they were. And yet again, another blow of like, oh, here's, the truth coming out, and I got to deal with it. And I had talked to him about it, and all right, what do we need to do for you to get back on your feet? Because you need to be a provider. And now the truth is out there and I'm here. So what do we need to do? And I helped him financially get a truck so that he can get back on the road and get his logistic company back up and going, because you need to be a provider. You need to be doing something. And my son was getting ready to go to college. He's wrapping up his senior year and he's getting ready to go to college at this point. And I had some funds set aside, and I had come into several large sums of money in addition to having my business. And I said, look, I will help you. And we had almost like this business meeting where I would have asked anybody questions as an investor. And I said, can you pay me back? When can you pay me back? Because yes, you're my husband, but I didn't marry knowing that I was going to have to take care of you. That's not how you presented this situation to be. And so purchased him a truck, and we got into an argument that night about the truck and the transaction of it all. And I just remember him again doing what I said not to do, getting in my face, yelling, screaming, invading my personal space, making me feel, my hands were shaking at this point. And I was like, I gotta leave. This is the second time I decided to leave, just to step away, because I would leave, but I would always come home. And I would always tell him where I'm going. And in this instant, I decided to just check into a hotel, because I remember him saying, if you keep leaving and going to your sister's house or running your friend's house, they're just going to feel like something's wrong in the marriage. And I'm thinking something is wrong in the marriage. But, I respected that from him as my husband. And, maybe I shouldn't be taking all this stuff to friends and family, and let me just go to a hotel. So I went to a hotel and I texted him when I got there. And before I left, I said, look, I need to leave. I said, again, the atmosphere of our home is uncomfortable. Matter of fact, that night he in the kitchen, in his anger, he had knocked a dish rack of dishes. He hit it and it came flying towards me, and there was a butcher knife in it, and the butcher knife went whizzing past my chest. And that's when I was like, I gotta go. Because now you're expressing your anger in a physical form, taking it out on the home and the furniture. I'm not about to be next. And I told him, I said, I need to leave. This is why I need to leave. And I showed him, I held my hand up. I said, my hands are shaking. This is not a healthy environment. I can't be here. And I said, I'll let you know when I get to the hotel. I will let you know where I'm at. I will let you know the address. I will let you know the room number, but I need to leave here. I did that. I went to a hotel. I texted him. I told him I loved him. And I laid down on the floor of the hotel room, prostrate on my face, and I started praying for my marriage. I prayed probably for about 2 hours. I remember I prayed until I was like drowsy, dizzy, tired. And it was probably about 2 a.m. in the morning at this point. And I got up to go to bed. and I get a text from him, and it says something like, why would you leave home to go to a hotel when you could have been here? You're probably out cheating on me. And I remember I just rolled my eyes and turned my phone off and went to sleep, because I'm like, this man doesn't know me at all. He doesn't know me at all. I left a volatile environment to come get peace outside of our home. And I laid on my face for 2 hours praying for you and praying for our marriage, to get up to a text message that's barraging me and bullying me. And I just turned my phone off. And I woke up the next morning. I remember talking to God again, praying and asking God to, touch his heart. And God, I want to make this marriage work. And, I just inviting you in. And I remember God saying, go home, go home. And it was like very urgent. Go home, go home. So I jumped up, got dressed, left the hotel, and I was actually excited, because I remember thinking, God's telling me to go home. I prayed all last night. We're going to be okay. Like, he's missing me, and that's why God's telling me to go home, and I should be at home with my husband. So I rush home, hopeful, and I get to the front door, and it's locked. The deadbolt is on. And the significance of that is, we did not have a key to the deadbolt. You lock the deadbolt from the inside of the house, right? So when you put the key in the regular lock, it unlocks it, but you can't get in because of the deadbolt. Whenever either one of us was away from home, we never put the deadbolt on, because we knew the other one had to get in. Now, I'm trying to remember, did I text him to say? I probably did, to say I'm leaving, I'm on the way home. I did. So that's why I was shocked, because the deadbolt was on, and I told him I'm on the way home. So I'm ringing the doorbell, knocking on the door to my own home to get in, marital home. And he takes his sweet time, and he finally comes and snatches the front door open. And before I could say anything, he says, I knew you were out effing somebody. And I stand there shocked, and just tears start streaming out my eyes. And he walks off. And I walk in the house, because again, I'm thinking, this man doesn't know me at all. He doesn't know me at all. He doesn't know the kind of woman that I am. He doesn't know the potential of the wife that I want to be. He doesn't know me. Why, God, am I with this man? That statement felt like a knife, a sword jabbed through my heart. And like I got kicked in the stomach with someone's foot on my stomach to pull the knife back out. And I just dropped. It was such an insult to my character. It was such an insult to my personal relationship with God. It was such an insult to the woman that I am, and the commitment and the promise and the honor and the vows I had taken before God. Because see, when I gave my vows, and everybody says you make these vows before everyone and before God, I was happy that day, because I made those vows to God and my husband was hearing them. You understand? And for this man who had in a short time to put me through so much in so little time, to now be deflecting his insecurities, because that's what it was. It wasn't me at all. He was insecure, and he lacked the confidence to deal with the woman that I am. And so his new MO was to debilitate me and attempt to debilitate my self-esteem and to paint this view of me being this woman that I was not, but the man that he was, because those insecurities were telling on who he was and what he was doing. But it was so debilitating. It hurt. It hurt because I'm like, you don't even know what I went in that hotel room and did. I laid up with God, not another man. And it was said so vulgar and so vile. It has so much hatred in his voice. And I just came in the house numb and just went on about my day. And there was a part of me that was like, I really want him to apologize. I really want him to, God, you speak to me, speak to him. You got it. I know you're speaking to him, but he's not listening. He's missing you left and right. And I remember later, not that day, but later on down the line, we had a conversation about that day. And he actually admitted to me, he said, I wanted to come back and apologize to you and just put my arms around you and hold you because I knew what I said wasn't true. But he never did. He told me that months later. That's what I wanted to do. And by this time, I knew the answer. I knew why he did it, but I needed him to say it. I said, well, why didn't you? He said, my pride. In our marriage, pride was the very thing God gave me out of every incident when we would sit down and come back and talk and pray about it and go, look, let's peel this away. God started showing me his pride. His pride. He's prideful. I want that pride broken. He needs to understand that he is going to ruin himself and this marriage and his life if he doesn't get a hold and deal with that pride. And there was a conversation we had one night because I did, in our marriage, I wanted a very transparent, open, and authentic marriage. And at night, we did something called pillow talk, which is we agreed that, you know, before we went to sleep, we'd always talk about our day or just things that were on our mind. And I even said to him one day, I said, look, I said, I want us to be such friends and in our marriage that we can be comfortable talking about uncomfortable things. And at the time, I was getting requests for speaking and mentoring and traveling. And I said to him, and I'm a TV talk show host, radio host, entrepreneur, public figure. I did things in the public spotlight, in the public eye. And I said to him, I said, listen, I said, I know you're an attractive man and there's attractive women. So you're going to see women. You're not blind. You know, I'm not blind. I'm a good looking person. You're a good looking person. How do you feel when I'm on the road? Like if a man tries to hit on me, do you trust me enough to, reject them, number one, and put them in their place or not carry myself in a manner to make a man think that he can even cross that line? And if he does try to cross that line, do you trust me? Are you comfortable enough knowing, secure enough in this marriage that won't happen? And that conversation made him uncomfortable. And I remember thinking, this shouldn't be, we have to have conversations like this. I'm not going to do that. I'm just having a conversation, a real conversation with you in our marriage, because number one, marriage is hard. Number two, this is a marriage that I fully believe is ordained by God. And anything ordained by God, the enemy is going to try to wiggle his way in and destroy, damage, and distract. And so I was talking to him from that aspect, and it goes both ways. Can I trust you? Do I trust you? We've gone through stuff already, and we need to have these very real conversations. And it made him so uncomfortable for me to give him a scenario that other men could potentially approach me. And he was so focused on the fact of, well, why would you let them? Why would you wait? I don't let anybody do anything. That's the whole point of this conversation. But I want us to be such friends that you trust me when I'm traveling. If there's times that I'm traveling without you for work or for business or speaking, and if that happens, I can come home and you'll be like, babe, let me tell you about this guy. I mean, he was fine, but I wasn't going to joking, witty, banter, and playing. I wanted our marriage to be comfortable like that, where we could talk about it, but it was not going to damage and destroy us. And we can build trust to go, I know my woman serves the Lord and loves the Lord and reverences God so much that she would not dishonor this marriage. But that conversation made him uncomfortable, and he focused more on, you're telling me you're going to cheat. And that bothered me. It bothered me because, again, it was the entrance of showing this is your mindset. This is your insecurity. This is your lack of confidence. And again, God, why did you tell me to marry somebody that's not on this level with me? There was a lot of confusion in that. And we had that conversation, and the marriage just began to digress and to crumble with his behavior, and God revealing that, look, this is a pride issue. And we had that conversation. And I remember asking him, so let me ask you something. I said, when you were a kid, did you get away with things for the most part, or did you get in trouble? Did you get reprimanded? And he says, he thought about it. He says, I got away with stuff for the most part because my grandmother raised me mostly. But my mom, she let me get away with things too. And I said, I could tell. It shows. I said, because you're an adult now. You're an adult, you're a father, you're a husband. And when you do things and I come to you to discuss them, you avoid it. You lack accountability and your pride gets in the way and you get arrogant and you don't want to discuss it or you deflect. I said, I can tell that it happened in your childhood and it wasn't checked. And I said, don't you think that God is bringing all this stuff out? Not because he wants to beat you up about it, but he sent a woman to you that hears his voice, that can give God her yes amidst anybody else would have been like, oh no, I didn't sign up for this. I'm out of it. But I'm so obedient to God and I want this to work that I can handle God using me to help you through your healing because he used you to help me through mine. I had to receive that. I had to see my flaws. I had to allow God to correct me when you were still there beside my side and God was bringing all this stuff out of me that I thought I dealt with. So I'm giving that in return, but you're rejecting it. You refuse. And really, pride, if I had it to say again to my ex-husband, is what damaged our marriage. Pride, lack of accountability, and the utmost refusal to listen to and obey God's voice. And over time, that just damaged us. I remember getting angry one evening because we had another disagreement and I just was fed up and I took my ring off and I threw it. I was standing in the living room. It was open floor plan and I slung it from the living room all the way to the back of the house into the kitchen. And I just was like, I'm done. And I don't remember what the argument was about or the disagreement, whatever it was, but I was like, I'm done. And of course, as time went on, we talked about it. Let's work through this. Let's continue with counseling. And I remember feeling guilty because I had done this quite a few times, threatened to leave the marriage or take the ring off and be done. And this last time that I did it, he just was like, you're not going to keep taking that ring off and giving it back to me. If you want to be done, then, we'll be done. And I remember feeling guilty because I'm like, this is not how a marriage works. This ring doesn't come on and off like this, Takiya. Like, yes, it's frustrating. Yes, he's doing some really debilitating things. But you can't keep taking it on, taking it off, taking it on, taking it off. And so in the days following, he had told me he had picked the ring up and he was on the back porch and he said he had slung the ring because he was so angry. He threw it even further in the backyard. And our yard was huge. Like I said, he had, when I talked about the business retreat, the 5 acres of property, the yard was huge. There were horse stalls, everything, no horses, but the stalls. And so in my mind, I'm like, that ring could be anywhere because you stood on the back porch and threw it. And I felt so guilty that it had come to that I decided, he was at work one day, and I said, I'm going to go in the backyard and I'm going to find the ring and I'm going to surprise him and tell him I found the ring. And I'm going to tell him I'm sorry, like, for my actions, not for wanting to have a conversation with him about dishonesty or anything, but I should not have took it to that level. And I'm sorry for that. So my son happened to be home that day and I asked him, can you help me go look for this ring? And I told my husband at the time, I said, I'm going to go find it. And when you go home from work, I'm going to have it. And he was like, okay. And I remember, he didn't really have any emotions about it, but he just was like, okay, all right, do what you got to do. And my son and I got out there and I remember being on my hands and my knees on this ground, asking God, Holy Spirit, tell me where the ring is at. Looking, searching, digging through leaves, crawling around on the ground, trying to stand on the porch and think if he stood this way and turned that way and projected it, which way did it possibly go? I'm out there looking for this ring because I feel bad that I took it off and threw it. My son is looking, I'm looking. I finally get this idea. Oh, one of my friends has a metal detector. I'll go borrow that, and that should help narrow it down. So I get in my car, I call my friend, tell her I'm coming. I get in my car, I drive across town. It's like 40 minutes back in the neighborhood that I used, that my home was in, that I actually still had at this point, but was not living in because I was living with my husband. And my daughter was living on the property. So I drive back to my friend's home, and on the drive there, before I even get there, I just start to get this swirling in my spirit. Did he really throw the ring? Is the ring out there? Now, this wasn't my own thought because I was dead set on finding this ring. He said he threw it in the backyard. I'm going to go find it. But I get this dropped into my spirit. Is the ring really in the backyard? So I'm like, I know better. I know better than to be thinking that this man, my husband, is allowing me to look like a fool out here on my hands and knees in this big old backyard, searching for a ring that's not really out here with my son, who I've apologized to for showing these actions as a wife to my husband. Surely not is this man misleading me to think this ring is back here. So instead of getting the metal detector, I stop, I pull over, and I call my husband. And I said, did you really throw the ring in the backyard? I didn't say it accusatory. I just asked the question. And he responds vehemently, yelling and shouting, I got sick and tired of you taking that ring off, and no, I didn't throw the ring, and da-da-da-da-da. And all I could think is, why would you do that to me? Why would you let me think this ring is in the back? Why didn't you just tell me? Why did you even tell me that you threw it and got rid of it? And then when I come to you and tell you I'm going to go find it, why would you not tell me? You're belittling me. You're mocking me. You're making me look like a fool and in front of my son. And that day he came home from where I went back home, curled up on the couch, really sad, really upset, feeling really ashamed and foolish and so not respected. And he came home and he's got an attitude because, again, when he was confronted with things, his way to respond was never in communicating or in love. It was always defensive and disabling and mean. And he came home and I laid on the couch and he came in, and I think we were supposed to go on a date that night or something. And because he came in and started ironing his clothes. And I laid on the couch. There was a couch in our bedroom at the foot of our bed. And I didn't have anything to say. He He didn't say anything to me because he already knew, well, this is a situation here. And so I'm going to be the one that's going to be mad. And I finally just kind of whispered to him. He was ironing his clothes. And I said, why would you do that to me? And he has the iron in his hand and he's ironing on the iron board and he just takes it, bang, 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 and slams it several times and starts yelling at me about me and my actions and how I respond to him when I'm questioning him about something he's done wrong to me in essence. And it was in that moment that I was like, this isn't going to work. This marriage isn't going to work. At this point in time, we're about 6 months into the marriage. I had stress. I was taking, no kidding, I had about a drawer full of 10 bottles of pills that I had started to slowly be prescribed over the course of the marriage because I was constantly sick and they didn't know what was wrong with me. They could not find or figure out. My voice had become very scratchy and almost non-existent. It was difficult to talk. My stomach hurt all the time. My hair was becoming dry and brittle. My skin, when I look back at photos, I looked very ruddy and like there was this mask over my face of darkness. I had really bad heartburn and acid reflux, just a plethora of things. There were my women's health. There were things going on there that I'd never had occur and couldn't understand and couldn't figure out. And the doctor couldn't pinpoint. And I was on all kind of antibiotics. My whole body, my nervous system was under attack. And it was because of the quick amount of stress that I was enduring in the marriage. And I wasn't myself. I had isolated myself from friends and family because I had moved further away from them. And my goal was to focus on the marriage, which was now consuming me, and embarrassment and shame and guilt were setting in. And I just was not healthy. And I made the decision, actually, whenever I would leave, I was always seek God for, what do I need to do? And when I left at 6 months, I went back to a friend's house so that I can think. It was always easier to remove myself from the marital home because it had become such a place of peace to a place of war and warfare. And I always needed to remove myself from that environment so that I can think clearly, hear God, speak to God, pray, and have some semblance of peace. And so in June of 2021, I'm sorry, because we met in 2020. We got married January. We got married January 2021. I remember it now. I think it was the 25th. Anyway, around June 25th, almost 6 months to the date, I was like, I need to leave again. And I went to that friend's house and I sat for 3 days and really sought God and really thought about it. And I knew when I decided that I'm not going to remain in the marital home. I want my marriage to work, but I feel like there's things that we need to continue to grow through. And maybe we need to take a step back and work on those things, but still progressively work on the marriage. Maybe we need some separate space here because I'm not myself. And I made that decision, and it always seemed every time I left, I had peace, I had clarity, more so out of the home than in the home. And, but God would always direct me back. And this time in particular, I did not feel like God was directing me back. He wasn't telling me to divorce or leave the marriage, but I had a green light with separate. And that is what I presented to my husband at the time, that we work on the marriage, we work on us. I'm not leaving you, but I need to be able to have my peace, and we need to be able to work through these things amicably and with God, and do this in a way where it is not debilitating me. And so I moved into my own place 6 months into the marriage, and he actually moved in with his sister, who was closer to me, so that we could still continue to kind of go back to those days of dating, and like, where do we need to circle back, and what are we missing now? And let's work on this. And we did. And that worked for a while until it didn't. And I'm going to stop right there, because I said this was either going to be a 2-part or it's going to be very long. And I'm already at a little bit over 2.5 hours in. And I'm just going to do a second half to this, because this is the bulk of the marriage that I've never talked about. And I felt strongly that I needed to talk about this, and I got a release from God to talk about it. And I've done that. And I want to leave this as part 1, because part 2, and there will probably be a part 3, because that's even really long. We'll enter more into the separation phase and stage, and what we went through during that stage, which ultimately led to my hearing God say, "That's it, Takiya, get out of my way. That's it." Which was ultimately God telling me, you have your release to leave this marriage. Because when I left in June, I'll leave you with this. What God said to me was, I did not create you to be broken, bruised, battered, betrayed, or belittled. That was his answer to my prayer of, God, am I supposed to stay in this? Like, why? This is not how my marriage was supposed to be. And he responded with those 5 words, I did not create you to be those things. Meaning, if any of these things are going on here, I'm not pleased with it. And I would never tell you to stay or put yourself in a position where this is debilitating you, neglecting you, and ultimately killing you, because I was dying. And I didn't realize that at that point. But we'll talk about that in the coming episodes. And I will say this, what's so significant about me sharing this story is I remember when I first met him, one of the things he said to me was, I can't wait for you to stand on stages and talk about me. And I remember thinking, that sounds weird. That sounds really weird of you, or very arrogant, because what do you mean you can't wait for me to stand on stages and talk about you? But in my reasoning, let me tell you how I took it. Because this man knew I talked to him in growing a relationship and a friendship and a bond, and him being my husband, all the trauma and all the turmoil and all the setbacks and the disappointment and the heartbreak I'd endured. And I took that statement as, I'm your answer. I'm the answer to your prayers to God. I'm going to be Mr. Right. I'm going to be the godsend. I'm going to get it right. And you're going to have such a beautiful, amazing, happy, joyous life and marriage with me that you will testify about our marriage. You'll talk about us on stages. You'll talk about the man that I am to you on stages. That's how I took it. That's how I reasoned with it. But looking at it now, it's so interesting that I am talking about him, but it's in no way, shape, or form the way he meant it. And I'm not talking about him to bash him, trash him, or put him down. I'm talking to testify of my God and what God brought me through. And for anyone listening under the sound of my voice, for you, the listener, to relate and know that you're not alone, and that you're not the only one that went through or is going through something. So I will leave you listeners with that. And I will promise to get back with you on the next episode and pick up with the separation phase of the marriage and how that led to divorce and ultimately to him being charged and arrested with felony aggravated stalking against me. Until next time, thank you for listening to what I've shared behind this smile. Hey, thanks so much for joining me today. Please help me to continue to spread the message of hope, encouragement, and inspiration by sharing my podcast with your friends, family, loved ones, and complete strangers. Someone needs to hear what has been said today. Like, follow, share, subscribe, and download on all platforms for Behind This Smile with Takiya LaShawn.